I mean, she was looking at me with pure hatred because that's how she looks at me. And it was just like, okay. And it was so good for me to know that all of the work that I've done, all of the self-work, this life, past life, DNA, all of it, all of the spiritual work has been worth it because she just has no power over me anymore.
Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magecha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Katrina Collier. Hi, Katrina. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, it's a thrill. Absolute thrill. I'm delighted. This is going to be fun. So thank you.
That's not often the words I hear, but let's go with fun.
I think it's a challenging topic.
It is going to be a challenging topic. So let's kick off with, and I know you've got this question prepared or the answer prepared, but who is Katrina?
Do you know, I did cheat and come up with an answer because it's complicated, and I think it is for everybody. So I would say, first off, I am a victor over childhood trauma or child abuse. I'm a highly sensitive person. I've healed complex PTSD. They're all sort of part of the journey, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. I'm also very spiritual. I'm clairaudient, claircognizant. And then on top of that, I'm a memoirist, an author, a facilitator, a speaker, like the business side of me. But first and foremost, I think I'm a victor.
And
not even a survivor, a victor.
A victor, I love that. And we'll go into why you use that particular word in a moment. But if you were meeting someone for the first time, how would you introduce yourself?
Just my name. It's funny, I let people talk first. I love them to share stuff before I tend to say what I do. And then I tend to answer, depending on what they've said. Interestingly, Claire Bush, I don't know if you've met her in our world, said to me, "You're quite reserved." And I went, "I'm sorry, what?" Because as you can hear, I'm really open. But she went, "But you're not about your spiritual side." So that's where I would be less inclined to say things like I'm clairaudient, claircognizant, or even that I'm highly sensitive, because when you say that to people, they go, "Oh, you mean super sensitive?" Like it's an insult. It's like, no. So I tend to be a bit more reserved about that. So I would be much more inclined to say, I'm known as an author of The Robot Proof Recruit. I've got another book coming out, things like that before I went into the personal.
Okay.
So that was a long-winded answer to a very short question.
Sometimes that's the way it goes. So let's talk about your childhood and why you use the word victor.
Well, I use the word victor thanks to my beautiful friend Sue Ingram, who said, "You're not a survivor, you're a victor over it." And so my childhood was complicated. My mother, due to her own circumstances, is a narcissist. She emotionally and physically abused all four of us. However, I don't like to tell their stories because it's not mine to tell. So for me, it was, just verbal, the constant criticism, the constant inability to please her, stuck as the codependent, constant fear. I was always scared of how she would be. And
from what age was this? So what are your earliest memories of this starting?
Oh, yeah.
And where were you?
So when it actually started, I don't recall, but my body recalled, which I've written out in my memoir. I was 3 years old, and Mum told me about this when I was 17 and actually didn't believe her because she lies all the time. So I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is not true." But actually it was true. She picked me up from preschool. And apparently I kicked off and didn't want to go home. So I did that thing you never do to a narcissist. I embarrassed her.
Okay.
And if you think of Mrs. Bouquet and Keeping Up Appearances, it's like that kind of a thing. You don't want to embarrass somebody like that, much as Mum's not a social climber. Anyway, she brewed. And when she got home, in her own words, she hit me so much she could understand how a parent could kill a child. Now, I have no recollection of this incident. But when
At the age of 3?
At the age of 3. But I went into defensive mode. So when I started seeing a chiropractor, I had one that did kinesiology, the muscle memory testing.
Right.
And Laurie was going through my body and she went, "This started at 3." And I just started crying because it was like, it happened. It actually happened. And then when I reconnected with my sister, I asked her and she said, oh, yeah, Mum talked about it. Every so often she'd talk about it. And that's when I suddenly went, well, where was my father? So he must have known about it and he left us there. So it was from such a young age and such an important age that I was protecting myself and defending myself. And I used to put out my mid-thoracic because I'd be like this all the time. I was so prickly and so just on the defensive because I didn't know how else to operate. Until I literally fell into healing. I didn't even know I was going. I went to see somebody about work and she went, oh, hang on a minute.
So let's not get to that part of the story just yet.
Sure.
So, but where were you in the world?
So I was in Sydney, Australia. I was on the North Shore, which is extremely privileged. Big white middle class house, private school education, cars, food, toys.
And
on the outside, you would not have seen it.
And where are you in the sibling hierarchy?
I'm the baby.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's boy, girl, boy, girl. My eldest brother and sister are from my mum's first marriage.
Right.
And my mum's first husband killed himself and left her with a 3 and a 1-year-old, which is some of the reason that she is the way she is, not the full, but some of it. And then she dated my father after being introduced on a blind date. And then after a year, he left. And then he reappeared because he wanted to be a parent to my older siblings with no skills to be a parent. And apparently, because she repeated this quite frequently, when he proposed, she had a shiver of fear go through her because she's also quite psychic. But she said yes. Produced my brother who has Asperger's, but we didn't know that for years. But he was always different and used to shake and didn't have all the social cues that someone who doesn't have Asperger's has. And then had me. So that's some of the story and some of the reason behind the way Mum is and why she is. But it was all about Mum not feeling in control and trying to control us. So there was the emotional abuse, but there was also the physical with it.
Right.
So it would be things like I'd bring home my report card from school and it wouldn't be good enough. And there would be a belting that would follow, but I wouldn't know quite when. Or it would be an explosion of temper because I'd said something in the morning and she'd brewed all day. And this went right on, right through my teens.
So
until I finally left.
So let's take a step back almost.
Mm-hmm.
And what was school life like? And what were your friends like? What was life outside of home like? And when you say you would just never know because we lived in an amazing part, we had everything going for us, etc.
The financial side.
So describe life from the outside in, I suppose, to start with, so that we can really understand the picture before we go inside and see that.
I have to say, under about the age of 10, my memories are very scattered. So I was very close to my next door neighbour, who I spent most of my time at her house as much as I could rather than at my house. We were typical Gen X, buy kids, go out, So actually there was a sort of element of freedom, much as I felt trapped. So I spent a lot of time in our swimming pool, which was like one of those above ground, Australia, warm. And I look back sometimes and think I wasn't supervised. It's the one I didn't drown, but no,
you learn to swim really quickly.
Yeah, you do in Australia. And I spent a lot of time sitting on the bottom of the pool, actually, really strange. I used to love that silence. So in that respect, there was a sort of element of freedom, but I didn't tend to bring people into the house. Because if it was so formal and that, like Mrs. Bouquet, the keeping up the appearance. And so I tended to go to other people's places. I think until I was really lucky when I went to senior school, I fell into an amazing group of friends. And I think they're the reason that I'm still here. I think if I'd not had friends, like I didn't really have so many in junior school, that I would have probably the self-hate would have taken me over the edge because I certainly wasn't happy. I don't know how that came across to them. I mean, I've had one school friend who said she didn't realise, and another one said to her, yeah, but things were always odd in that house. But it was the 80s. Yeah. We didn't talk about it in the same way.
Did you talk about this stuff with your siblings? So where were they in all of this in terms of, because they were inside the house and they must have had some visibility of what was going on for themselves, but also for you. And did you ever come together to have a conversation or was it just the unspoken rules?
No. it was funny, and I'm going to come forward, which I know you're trying to keep me back there, but it was really interesting. I did a charity trip for Hope for Justice charity, thanks to an amazing man called Ian Pettigrew, and we went to Kampala. And we went into the slums in Kampala because that charity aims to end modern-day slavery. And I'm watching these street children, and I'm watching the bigger one taking care of the smaller one, and the older one, the younger one, and I'm watching this and I'm like, wow, we didn't have that in my household. We were in silos.
Right.
And it took one of the other ladies on the trip who said to me, well, of course, your mother couldn't have controlled you if you weren't in silos. She kept you apart. And it was like this huge light bulb. That's why we didn't talk. We'd have ganged up on mum and then wow, it wouldn't have been worth it. I mean, I dread to think how she would have retaliated if we had even tried. So we didn't. My eldest brother denies it. So even if he heard this, he would deny it. And he probably got the most beatings of the four of us. My sister and I have spoken many times since. And absolutely, it was emotional and physical abuse. There's no denying it.
But it wasn't. But those conversations did
not happen then.
And where was your dad?
Well, that's it. So Dad was because when I suddenly brought them into alignment years later, Dad used to leave quite early in the morning for work and come home at 9 at night, and he'd sleep most weekends. I used to go up to the local shops with him. That was like my escape. I was definitely his favourite, even though he said he didn't have any. I was. I know I was, and they would go. She totally was. But I look back and go, I was escaping. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but it was, I felt safe out of the house with him at the shops. But he did not protect us at all. He passed in 2022. And because of my Claire skills, I have spoken to him since he's passed. And he has explained that he also was abused by her from day one. But my father also, his own childhood was filled with a lot of violence. So he wasn't a strong man and he couldn't protect us. He wasn't like emotionally strong enough, even if he'd seen it. And I'm not even sure he saw it because so much of it was psychological.
And
or while he was out.
Is your mum still alive?
Mm.
And have you spoken to her?
No.
Do you talk to her?
No. I spoke to her in November 2022 when I was home. I was in the house for 20 minutes to collect some of my father's possessions. And it was hysterical because Mum had created such a drama. She basically said to me she had some possessions for me that I had to go and collect, but she didn't want to see me, which was just like, okay, how's that going to work exactly? So she created all of this stress and all of this drama for herself and for my eldest sister, which is just not fair. Whereas I wasn't really that bothered. I sort of went in and said thank you. And I looked at her and saw the broken human that she is and felt so much sadness for her that she can't see that she's created the situation she's in, and felt so free because I thought, she was looking at me with pure hatred because that's how she looks at me. And it was just like, okay. And it was so good for me to know that all of the work that I've done, all of the self-work, this life, past life, DNA, all of it, all of the spiritual work has been worth it because she just has no power over me anymore. And it was such a relief and a release, if that makes sense.
And a proof to yourself that
I'm fine.
You're in this space that's different.
I'm a victor, not a victim and not a survivor. I'm a victor over it. It's not, I've got the gifts that come from the trauma, which is incredibly independent, resilient, creative, a communicator, because I couldn't communicate as a child. I was always shushed. So that I remember.
So let's now take you back to a day in the life. So share a particular day that you remember vividly that you've. Yeah,
there aren't that many, but I'll give you an idea of what it's like. I mean, with someone who's a narcissist, so you remember comments and things that were said. I mean, one day I can remember I had said something to my mother in the morning. So at this point, I'm late teens. So I'm starting to stand up for myself. And I did, this sounds shocking, but I realized my mother bruises and I learnt to hold her off by her wrists and threaten her with bruises. I was like, do you want bruises to show off at work or would you like to stop hitting me? It was the only way I could get her to lay off me. So I started having I started being a lot stronger and pushing back. But this particular day, I had annoyed her in the morning and I was sitting watching TV and she just came up behind me and smacked me like whoosh, across the ear from behind. And it was just, it's like the shock. And then how do you ever feel relaxed when you're in an environment like that? Because you don't know that you've upset somebody, because particularly if she's a covert narcissist. So it's all brewing. It's all under the surface, simmering all the time. And you're working on eggshells as the codependent, never able to please this person, never really sure of your footing. So it would be things like that. But it's also the gaslighting that comes with it. So in my 20s, when I got engaged, I won't say his name. I nearly did. Don't say his name. I went and saw them and showed them my engagement ring, and I was so excited. And we were living together. And then I went home and my mother called and told me how nauseous she felt when she looked at my engagement ring, at the hypocrisy, because we were living together. My non-religious mother was bothered that we were living together and getting married. And it was just like, wow. I curled up on the floor in the fetal position and sobbed, absolutely sobbed, because it was just so uncalled for and so not needed. And when I raised that with her, when you ask about, like, do I speak to my mother? I raised that with her years later and she told me I'd made the whole thing up and that I was lying. It's like, why would anybody make that up? Like, what would I gain from making that up? And it's just like, and that's the kind of crazy making that you get from a narcissist.
And so when you think about growing up and you think about your childhood, you think about the friends that you had, and you've said that your friends didn't necessarily know something was going on. I'm assuming you didn't have any physical, visible abuse. It was always hidden.
Well, she used to hit us with the feather duster, which was like the cane end, which was lovely when my brother broke it and she got a fat one. That was good. I remember going, thanks for that. But it was usually like on your butt. My sisters were evident. Hers were more visible. She used to get her like more on the thighs. I don't know why. But I think to me it was the emotional was more damaging than mum's physical, because she would do things like, I remember as like a younger child, go and bend over the bed, and she would probably leave me there for 5 or 10 minutes. It could have been hours. It felt like days. And then she would eventually come in and give whatever number of smacks. And this is very different. You know, kids were hit in the 70s and 80s, right? We were smacked. But that's different to a smack because it wasn't there and then in the moment. It wasn't like my dad hit me very few times. At one time was I nearly stepped out in front of a car and he got such a fright, he pulled me back and smacked me in the moment. I never stepped out in front of another car.
Yeah.
And I knew he did it from fear. Like it was like, oh my God, I nearly, you know, she nearly died. And that was different to what mum was dishing out. So I think they would have seen that I had no self-confidence. I think they were lucky because I loved them. So they got to see a lot of the real me, which a lot of people don't necessarily, well, they do now, but they didn't for many, many years. It was very hidden, the real me, because I had to pretend and try, and I didn't like who I was and I didn't want anyone to see it. But I felt safe with them.
Who were you as a child or as a teenager? How would you describe yourself back then?
Lost, really lost, absolutely riddled with self-hatred. I was playing the love addiction game unaware. I did that all through my teens and my 20s.
What's the love addiction game?
So it's basically where you meet somebody, like a partner, potential partner, and you immediately dream away a future with them. It's like a completely unrealistic. So any bit of affection you take on as love and a future. It's quite interesting. Love addiction is quite real. But how it played out was I slept around like nobody's business, because for those few moments I would feel loved and somebody cared and there was potential, and then it would all come crashing down, and then the self-hatred would just get even stronger, because I basically had mum's voice sitting here playing out. So even if I wasn't with her, I could hear her voice.
And what was she saying when she was sitting on your shoulder?
Just what a failure I was and how I never complete anything, and just it was just a stream of constant criticism.
About what?
Everything. Nothing I did was good enough.
Can you give us some examples?
Not physically. She didn't criticize me physically.
Okay.
That was quite surprising. Can I give specific? No, I mean, it would just be your grades aren't good enough, you don't concentrate, you talk too much, you do this, you do that. It's just literally everything. Nothing was, you tidy your room up, it wasn't good enough. It was literally everything. I felt scared to breathe because you just never knew what was going on.
What was your outlet at that time? Did you have an outlet?
Do you know, I think because I went to an incredibly good school and because I had those girls as friends, I didn't ever think, I'm done, I'm not going to succeed. I thought I would go to university, which I did, promptly failed and left because it was too much of a culture shock to me after the strict private school education, and too many boys and too many bars and not having to attend classes because I was in that spiral.
Yeah.
But I always knew because I worked hard. I had a work ethic. I started working at 15. I was working at Kentucky Fried Chicken and a retirement village. And so I knew I would work and I knew I'd be okay. I didn't think I'd become the powerhouse I consider myself now. I didn't think I would ever love who I am and do work that lights me up and, be known in the world of recruitment around the world. I didn't expect any of that. But I knew I'd be okay. I never thought that I'd struggle.
How did you know that at that point?
Probably the schooling.
The confidence that it gives you.
Yeah, and Mum worked. So it's really interesting because when I did actually marry someone, so my ex-husband Richard, and we've had this conversation, so he won't mind me saying his name. Mum was such a strong role model in the respect of working, but making all the decisions, which emasculated Dad. And I realised that I did the same thing in my marriage. So because Mum worked hard, I knew I would work hard. I expected women to work. It wasn't like I ever thought, that's just what I thought. So, and the schooling, being in a private girls' school, they set you up to work as well. They expect you to go off and be engineers, etc. So I went and I worked, got married, and then did the same thing. I suddenly took over. I was paying for everything, deciding everything, and I just didn't ask for Richard's input and destroyed our marriage in that respect. It destroyed for other reasons, but it was part of it. So it was quite interesting. So in the respect of I always knew I'd work and succeed in that respect, and not necessarily, have an X specific career, but I knew I'd work.
When you think about life reflecting backwards, do you believe you have characteristics from your mum?
Oh, for sure.
What are some of them?
I've got all the nasty ones. I'm going to bring you forward again. Every time you send me back, I come forward. I did Dr. John Demartini's breakthrough weekend. And I did that about 7 or 8 years into my healing, and I would not have stood it if I'd done it at the beginning. And it's not for everybody, and it's full on. But he's calculated how many traits there are in a human being. It's something like 4,700 and something. And we have them all. And in that weekend, he gets you to demonstrate where you have used the traits of somebody who you either put on a pedestal or despise, and what was the benefit to the other person of you using those traits as well, which is really hard to stomach. But it makes you have the compassion that you need to release yourself from the tie with that person. So it allowed me to lose all of my resentment towards my mother, because I have lied to people in the same way. I wouldn't have gaslit. The difference is if you called me out on a lie, I would have admitted to it. Mum doesn't. But I've certainly lied to people. I've certainly been cruel. When I used to argue with my ex-husband, sometimes he'd call me my mother's name and I would stop dead. I would not appreciate it at all, don't get me wrong, but it would make me go, oh my gosh, I am being my mother. I am hitting back in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
I was so defensive that if you said something to me, so say, oh, the worst was the yearly reviews, at work. And I would either sob uncontrollably or I would rip your jugular out with my words. And that's the kind of behavior that she did.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't know any better. I didn't like who I was. So I lashed out.
When did you realise there was a challenge and that you needed to do something?
Yeah, this is the funny thing. And this is so much of the reason I've written my memoir. So I had the kinesiology I mentioned earlier. So, and it was like, okay, so that abuse happened at 3. And then different things started happening and I started realising, yes, there was trauma, there was child abuse. And I started accepting that word.
So you didn't prior to this point, you didn't accept there was any form of abuse. You just thought it was
A
what
shitty
happened.
childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry if you're not meant to swear on this.
You're fine. You can swear.
It's quite good for an Australian to only say shitty. You shout F-bomb left, right and centre. But no, I just thought it was a traumatic childhood. I didn't think it was actual abuse. I certainly didn't think it was physical, emotional. I didn't know what a narcissist was. I didn't know how I was behaving, none of it. And I keep saying to Richard, what did I do? I finally worked out. We finally knew it was actual abuse. We knew this traumatic event happened and all of the ones that followed. I said, what did I do for 5 years before I met Michelle Zelly? What did I do? And he goes, I don't know. Neither one of us can remember. I guess I just continued playing my patterns and behaving, I would say, in inner teen mode. So I think just turned 40. I lost another contract, like a work contract, and it's like there've been many times I've been fired over the years, which is a good indicator that you need to sort stuff out. But I went to see Michelle Zelly because I was at a career crossroads. But she's herself a victor over child abuse, and she's a coach. I think she's a coach therapist because she's got so many skills in the kit bag. But I didn't know any of this, and I just started talking, and she just went, hang on, can we just go back here? A bit like you're doing. And she took me back and started peeling layers off the onion and started revealing the abuse to me and giving me tools to heal them. And what she said to me is that we have an inner child, a functional adult who's speaking now, and an inner teen. And when the inner child is scared, which often happens with child abuse kids, the inner child's scared, if the functional adult is nowhere to be seen, out comes the inner teen. And I was just spending most of my life as an inner teen. I was very emotional. You know, when you think of a teenager, door slamming, potty mouth, that was me. I was full on defensive.
Yeah.
And she started showing me the patterns and then giving me the tools to learn to, the way I learned to love myself was to reconnect with my inner child and give her the love. And then the inner, and, loving myself came, and then everything just got easier.
So at the point that you went to see her,
yeah,
it was about career.
A career.
It
idea.
wasn't about this. So you didn't seek out help or support for what had happened in your younger years.
Yeah, which is why I wrote my memoir. Literally why. And also because my sister won't deal with any of it, because she thinks you rip the lid off Pandora's box and that's how you deal with it, which is totally not how you deal with it, because it would never work. And it was the fact I didn't take an active step. Now, I don't think I'd have been ready to do the self-work until 40. So I'm glad in a way that I didn't, but I had a good period of time where I could have gone, hey, something's wrong here. But what I did realize while I was writing my memoir was when we were young, we did see a psychiatrist briefly, and my sister filled me in on who that was because she's 7 years older, so it helps when I've got gaps. And she hasn't got as much memory loss as I do. And she said, oh, yes, we did. And my memory of seeing this psychiatrist is being shut down, of speaking up, being incredibly upset and just being told to shush. Now, I don't know if it was the psychiatrist or my parents because, of course, the memory's warped. And I don't deny that. So most of my memoir is about the healing work, not my childhood, because there are so many gaps.
And when you think about the gaps,
yeah,
what do you think is the cause of the gaps?
It's a way that people cope with trauma. They detach through memory loss. And actually, it depends where you fall in the family as to how you cope with the trauma as well.
Yeah.
My eldest brother is extremely defensive and angry. And my sister does not feel one single thing in the moment. She is always like, if she was sitting here now, she'd be working out how to escape. That she wouldn't physically be here, so she can't feel anything.
Yeah.
With me, it was memory loss. I'm not sure with my full-blood brother. I genuinely don't know. I haven't spoken to him for years. So,
when you think about your journey, what for you was what was the moment where it really hit you and you started feeling like you needed to do something and take control to be able to move forward and heal?
I think the moment I knew that I was on the right path was a really interesting moment. So I'd had 3 or 4 sessions with Michelle, and at that point she was running these like 2-day NLP weekends, and she, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah.
Gosh, I got that out. Sometimes I just can't get those words out. Anyway, she said, I want you to come for this weekend. And over the course of the weekend, different things were bubbling up for people. And I don't know what caused my inner teen to come out, but obviously my inner child got scared. And at this point, I was learning how to cope with all of this stuff. And wow, I do remember very clearly how much venom and hatred I spewed forth at Michelle in that moment. And I remember thinking I wanted to run, I wanted to go. And Michelle was doing everything she could to get to my inner child, to speak to her. And she did, she got through. But I also remembered, you must stay. I had this, you have to stay, Katrina. It was a very quiet voice. It was probably soul. It was probably the first time I was hearing soul. You have to stay. And I went back for the second day. And that was the turning point. I think if I'd run, I would still be full-blown victim, inner teen, full of self-hate, just very, very, very miserable. And I wouldn't be achieving anything I'm achieving. So I think as far as, I'm not sure I quite answered your question, but that was a huge turning point moment. And then it was reconnecting with my inner child and doing the inner child work. There are so many people out there who have been through child abuse or have complex PTSD who are not doing inner child work. And it really concerns me because it's such a game changer. And they must find a childhood trauma-informed help specialist, professional, whatever term you want to call, coach, therapist, I don't care, to do that work, because it is life-changing. And then I think what really took me into really utter happiness was working with Isabel Gatherer the last few years into self-mastery. So it was like that whole 12-year journey. But it was that moment of sitting there just and projecting all of my hate at one person and her being able to take it and get through my incredible defenses. So I'm so grateful to her. I leave her notes, I left her one yesterday actually, voice notes all the time, just to thank her, because I'm so grateful that she just found the strength and the courage to basically face me down.
Yeah.
Sounds a lot more vicious than it was. It was quite verbal.
Yeah.
There were no punches.
No, but also the type of work, you have to be a strong enough character, but also understand the work and how to process and help someone process that work. It's not someone that you can just kind of go, hey, let's go down the pub and have a chat. No. It's not that kind of conversation.
No, but the work itself as well, I think it's very important, even though that might sound scary to some people. At no point in the entire time, even then when I was being very, very defensive, did I ever feel like she took me too far or that I was unsafe. Yep. Or even if I was sobbing, so what? It's energy. Like even if I was kicking and screaming and carrying on and letting out all the energy, sometimes I was jumping up and down like a hooligan, getting it out of my body. I was still safe. And I think that's really important. The process is like taking layers off an onion. It's not a Pandora's box. And I think that's really, so even though I had that moment, even then I was still safe.
Yep. This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below. What has been the moment where you felt the courage to be able to talk about this in the outside world and not keep it all within yourself or a close-knit group of friends, family, whatever that looks like?
Was there an actual moment? I mean, I've talked about my childhood trauma for a long time now. Less about the spiritual side, which I'm being much more open about now, because I'm realizing the more I talk about it, the more people also open up about it, because most of us are. Well, it's definitely since working with Michelle. So it's probably for at least 10 years.
That you've started talking to other people?
Because I want people to get help. I don't want them to sit in complacency. And I hear it all the time, and it's the denial, particularly when it's your parents. So I was talking to a gorgeous girl yesterday, and she said she had OCD. And I went, do you mind me asking, what was your childhood like? She went, oh, no, it was fine. And then a little later on, she said, oh, she didn't want to deal with the childhood stuff because she didn't want to bring up the anger that she feels towards her parents. And I went, there it is. Because you don't really have anything like OCD without having some form of trauma, and it's called a shame wound. If you look up the addiction tree, it shows, it's quite amazing. Shame is like the roots, and then it shows the behaviors and the trunk, and not the behaviors. I can't remember what it is. And anyway, on the limbs, you then have all the different addictions, and a thinking addiction is something like OCD, or it'll come out as love addiction, could come out as exercise addiction, work addiction. They all usually have a source of a shame wound that can be healed. So I feel if I speak openly about my journey and then encourage people when I come across others who I'm like, okay, I can see past that because I've done all of this work. I'm not a trained therapist, but it's just interesting that you can see the patterns at play, and I just encourage people. So, but the reason, it was funny, actually it's DeMartini again that helps you work out what your actual true values are. And speaking and being heard are very, very important to me. And I'd already ended up on stage and was already like writing and podcasting and doing all sorts of things before I realized why. And it was so much of the not being allowed to speak as a child.
Right.
Seeking help and not getting it. All the adult role models didn't protect me. I don't have memories of asking for help, but I'm sure that I did. Well, other than that psychiatrist. But I'm sure I did. I'm sure I asked. Actually, no, I did ask my father. I used to say to Dad, if I'd say something about Mum, he would just say, you can't change your mother.
You can't change your mother.
That was his. You can't change your mother. That was it. That's what he used to say over and over. Quite damaging. And I can't remember where I was going with that point. It's so annoying. Why I speak up? Because of that. That is a shutdown. That's like I'm not being heard.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, if I talk about it, if I make it seem normal, if I make the healing journey seem normal, and if I show that I have that compassion for my parents, that also then doesn't just shift the blame. It just, because you sort of stay as a victim if you continually go, well, they're the reason I am the way I am. So, Well, yeah, they are the reason you are the way you are, but you don't have to stay that way. You can choose a different direction.
I'm going to take you back a little bit.
God.
Only a little bit.
That's okay. I tend to just come straight forward to this year.
Yeah. And I think there's a journey that we need to take some of our listeners on.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise we've got this healed person, if there is such a thing, or healing person, should I say. But we don't understand how you got there.
Sure.
So I think it's really important to try and get there in a stepped way. You talked about your ex-husband. So you decided and at some point met him.
Yeah.
Tell me about that marriage.
Yeah.
In terms of when it happened.
Oh, yeah. So I will actually I'll take you back to 1990 when our mutual friend Angus Frost missed his flight and ended up on my flight from Hawaii to Sydney, where I'd been on holiday. And we stayed friends for years. And he eventually, he's English, moved. So he went back to England after being in Australia for a year, and then he moved to America, met Sue, his now wife. And when they got engaged, when they were getting married, he invited me and invited Richard. And we both flew in unaware of each other's existence. And I genuinely thought he was a holiday shag. And then 3.5 years later, married Richard. But it's all because of Angus missing that flight. So I'm quite grateful for that. And to me, it was the opportunity to start new.
Right.
It was like 2003. I have a new name. I'm moving to England. I'm starting my life afresh. But of course, he is also a victim of child abuse. I was a victim of child abuse. What initially attracts you, that sort of core wound that child abuse kids have, eventually repels you. So we started off great, and I did some of the stuff I talked about earlier where I was very controlling. The house was as sterile as the environment I grew up. It was pristine, clean, like constant, trying to keep everything perfect, and which is just unrealistic. And so we just started growing apart. But he did actually break the trust in our marriage. I don't know if he slept with this woman or not, but he broke the trust, and then for 2 years wouldn't let me talk about it And of course, that was hitting my values. So I did end our marriage, but I think it would have ended anyway because we hadn't healed our stuff.
Yeah.
What was really interesting, though, is we did separate for a time, and then because of our Labrador, I moved back in as his flatmate. So as I then continued on my healing journey, because I just started as I ended our marriage, he healed. So as I changed and healed, and he heard and he learned and he grew, he healed stuff as well. So I do say that for anyone who's in a marriage dynamic, the healing journey doesn't end your marriage necessarily, can actually create a lot of healing for the other person. And of course your children, if you have them, which we didn't, but so that's how Richard came along. He is still one of my closest people. He's currently where my dog is, for example.
Yeah.
We talk daily, but we just should never have got married, which we both laugh about now. So,
And sometimes those things happen.
Yeah, totally.
How do you get to the healing journey in terms of the spirituality that you say you don't talk about very often or haven't talked about?
I don't talk about it to Richard. He's such a logic person. It's hilarious. He let me put crystals all around the house and sometimes ask me about my odd feelings, but he denies the whole thing, which is hilarious. But it started when I met Monica. So I went from working with Michelle Zully to working with a woman called Laura Borland, who made me very aware of energy. So that feeling of, she used to say to me, why are you stopping money coming in? And I'm going, what are you talking about? She said, you've decided that you're going to work this way. What if you left it open and decided you work multiple ways? So she kind of gave me an awareness of the universe and energy, but not angelics and other stuff. Then I went to Pilates and met Monica. And she started talking to me about past lives and angels and all this crazy stuff. And I didn't think she was crazy.
Okay.
I just listened and went, okay. And then one day, this was a very distinct moment. I was in the fields with the dogs and there was nobody else in these fields. It's, technically you're not supposed to, actually you can't walk in there anymore. They've fenced it off. But it was these fields in Blackheath that only locals kind of knew about. But no one was in there. And there's a specific oak tree that I absolutely loved. And I'd already walked past and gone around the loop. So I'm going, all right, if you're real, if all of this crazy stuff is real, show me. And as I came back around, there were 2 pink balls sitting there. One of them a pink tennis ball. And they were not there the first time. And I wouldn't have missed them because my dogs would have picked them up. And it was just like, okay, now I started to believe. And it was then just gradually understanding things. I'd always been aware I had a very strong knowing. My mother does as well. So she knew I was going to have a car accident when I did. I knew my ex-husband was going to have a car accident when he did. He got exactly the same reaction that I got because he didn't listen to me when I told him not to drive. He was fine, by the way. But it was like, I told you not to drive. So the lack of empathy. When you actually asked before if I'd ever... yeah, there was a classic example. It was exactly the same. But there was this understanding, no, I've definitely got the clear cognizant side. Then it was, okay, she's talked about past lives and I was curious enough to go to Stepping Stones in Greenwich with her to see crystals. And then I started seeing Lorraine Flaherty to do past life work. And it was funny, no matter how much you don't believe it, your body reacts. So we would have these amazing past life regressions and I would suddenly be coughing or I felt myself hanging. You feel the energy coming out of your body as you release things. And it was like, okay, while your logic brain is going, maybe you've read this in a novel somewhere, maybe this isn't true, but you physically react to stuff. It's quite extraordinary.
So explain what you mean, because
okay.
Again, for
the non-spiritual listener.
For the non-spiritual listeners or the non-believers or the just logic brains or whatever we want to call them.
Sure.
What are you talking about?
Okay, I'll give you an example. Have you ever met somebody and you instantly, absolutely, utterly hated them for no reason whatsoever? You haven't even spoken. You're just like, I don't like you. Or the opposite. Have you met someone and absolutely adored them for no reason whatsoever? 2 seconds in.
That I have.
Okay, that's soul family. They're souls that we recognize from past lives that we've instantly we instantly recognize even though they look completely different, we're recognizing their light. It can also be places. So if you asked Richard, he would agree with this. I absolutely hated Chelsea. Now, why would I hate Chelsea? Absolutely no reason to hate. It's a beautiful part of London, isn't it? It's leafy and green. All the rich people live there. I mean, come on. Why would anyone hate Chelsea? Hated it. I mean, I wouldn't even want to go there. No reason. I grew up in Australia. Why would I dislike Chelsea? The very first past life regression I had was actually with a different person. And it turned out I was strangled to death in Chelsea, right near the Thames.
I'm going to take you back again. What do you mean by past life regressions? So,
okay. So it's
take us.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm very good at jumping all over.
Yeah. So just help us understand what you mean.
So you see someone. So I've seen Lorraine Flaherty and Paul, whose surname is just eluding me. He's an Australian, very famous past life regression therapist. And you go into a slightly meditative, slightly hypnotic state. I've been hypnotized to give up smoking. That was way deeper. It's very slight.
Mm-hmm.
So they count you down and they start helping you recall a particular past life. And it will be the one that you need to heal the most. They never present in any order that you'd expect them to present in. And I was basically lying on a bed. So with this very first one, and I can't remember how he did it, whether he took me down steps. Can't quite remember. But there was a lot of obviously breathing and relaxing and just being guided through the process. And I started to recall what they often get you to do is recall what you're wearing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was describing the 1800s. I was describing myself as a female, and I was forced into a marriage by my parents, who are same parents in this life, of someone of my class. I was being forced to marry somebody middle class, and I wanted to marry somebody who was working class and wasn't allowed. And the man they made me marry was very violent, and he strangled me to death. And I recalled all of this, but it was the fact I recalled it was in Chelsea.
Right.
And it was suddenly like, that's why I've always hated Chelsea, because I had no this life reason to dislike an entire area of London. It made no sense to me.
And so again, for the listeners, but also for a bit of me going, oh, do I really believe?
You don't need to.
How does one feel? And so earlier on in the conversation, you were talking about going to Greenwich.
Yes.
Where you were doing I think it was crystals.
The crystals, yeah.
And you were talking about my logical brain was thinking I was in a movie,
the past life
and I was talking about, was this in a novel, etc.
Yeah.
But then you said you felt the energy
in your body.
What do you mean by that?
Okay,
and how do you explain that to someone who is very logical, but also is a bit skeptical and going, what do you mean?
It's almost like you need to experience it to believe it.
Right.
So until I did experience, I didn't believe it. So I understand why if you're feeling like, and so many listeners will be like, what a load of rubbish, and that's fine, except for the fact they will also have these moments where they feel like they've been somewhere before.
Yeah.
Or they know someone. They immediately had that feeling that I described before. So we have all of these feelings like, I know people who've gone to other countries and walked the streets with such knowing. They're like, oh, I used to live down here. There's also been a scientist, I'm not answering your question, by the way, I'm coming back to it, but there's been a scientist who researched 3,000 children who have perfect last life recall. So they can describe that person to such an extent they were able to find the person, the history of that person, and everything the children said, because usually up to about the age of 6 or 7, you can recall your last past life. And so this is all documented, and there was even evidence of things like perhaps a birth defect or a birthmark that the child had that the person from the last past life also had. There were all these anomalies. So there's actual evidence of this as well, and neuroscientists are studying it. So I understand the skeptic point of view, and I've certainly addressed that in the memoir because I thought I have to bring it up. Because there's so many weird things that happen that you kind of like, but there's also, it's where does your energy go when you die? Your energy goes somewhere. So if you're someone like me, you believe it goes on and you have a choice to come back and have another life. But when I'm talking about it, during the regressions, there would be things like perhaps when I was strangled to death, I could feel the hands on my throat. I was experiencing the death again. You could genuinely feel it. And it's when I've had one where I was hanging from a noose and I could feel myself hanging. My head went back like this. And I could feel myself kicking at the stool, like a 3-legged stool, trying to get back. But yet at the same time, you're lying on a bed in 2000s, I think this was like in the 2010s, perfectly safe. But I could feel my body and the feeling and I had some voodoo implanted in me in one of my deaths, and I was like coughing and felt a bug release. And it's stuff that just doesn't make any sense if you just use your logic side.
Yeah.
But when your body's kind of going. So this will be a surprise to a lot of people, by the way.
It will. And
particularly anyone that reads my memoir and goes, okay.
And I think it will be a surprise, and it's different to the conversations we've had with other guests so far. So thank you for sharing.
But it's really interesting, though, but healing the contracts. So if you believe, as I do, that in our life between lives, and I learnt this from Monica, and then I went and experienced it, that we create these contracts. My mother and I had a lifetime together thousands of years ago where we created a hate contract. And when Mum recognised my soul in this lifetime, she played out that hate contract. And when I healed that contract, and there was a moment in there where I realised Mum had disconnected herself from the divine or God or universe, whatever you'd like to call them. So many names, doesn't matter. I sent light from my heart to her heart and up and reconnected Mum. In the past life regression over here, in that room over here in London, my mum on the other side of the world, completely unaware that I'm doing this. And then when I saw my sister the following year, I asked her, how's Mum? And she said, do you know she's been calmer? And I said, from about when? And she literally said the same time that I had reconnected her and we'd healed this hate contract. So a lot of the past life stuff explains this life. So it's been this journey of like layers of healing all of the trauma from this life and then going, okay, well, what is the cause?
Yeah.
I feel like it's something greater. And then just discovering it and going on a journey of discovery. And then being open to just trying different things.
And being curious with it.
Totally
because,
curious.
yes, of course, not everything will work for everybody. And some people will be sitting here going, oh, my God, this is just mad. But that's okay. Yeah, and it is okay because it's absolutely fine for people to have different views and different opinions on what will work. And also, but my biggest ask would be don't judge someone who has a different way of doing something.
Yeah, or a different way. It's funny how we'll believe some of the Christians, you know, they go to church and they believe in a God and that's okay. We'll accept that. But you say something like my stuff, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Is it weird or are they weird for not believing it? But interesting, you speak about steps. What I didn't want to do was say, this is how this is the way to heal.
Yep.
This is how I healed. These are the things I chose to try. Some worked, some didn't. Some were, you know, the tapping, the EFT. We did that and I released anger towards my father. I didn't even know I was holding.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, that was unexpected. And that was in the mix of a whole load of things. And that's a lot more logic side that people have seen that work and, you know, tried that. So actually, again, the girl yesterday, she was saying, you know, what's your advice? I said, go do what you're drawn to.
Don't try and use your logic. Use your gut. Use your feelings.
Oh, I'm drawn to Kundalini yoga. Go try it. I'm drawn to this. Go try it. People will say things to me like, doesn't appeal to me at all. Sounds great. Go for it.
Yeah.
I didn't try that. And I think this is where it's like, be curious. Why are you reacting the way you're reacting? Do I want to stay reacting that way? Do I want to stay feeling that way? No, I don't. I'm going to try this. Let's see what happens.
Is there anything else you want to share around your spiritual journey?
It's been fascinating. Do you know something I would like to say is there are people out there who have extremely strange inner dialogue in their head. Now, I don't mean dangerous inner dialogue. So I don't mean schizophrenia or anything like that. But full-blown two-way conversations. They're super creative. They are probably highly sensitive people, which I am.
And what does highly sensitive people mean other than
Sure.
you're going to say something and I'm going to burst into tears, for example?
No, see, that's probably super sensitive. So highly sensitive people are 1 in 5, 1 in 6 people. It is a genetic trait, and all of the normal senses, so touch, sound, etc., taste, are all above normal. They're a higher level. And if people who are highly sensitive are born into a house that's stressed, so say their parents are stressed, they're both working, Gabor Mate is the person to hear talking about this.
Yeah.
If the parents are, say, working and they're stressed and there's arguments over money all the time, that highly sensitive child can get overwhelmed and shut down. And those children are being diagnosed with ADHD when actually they have complex PTSD, because complex PTSD doesn't necessarily just come from trauma. It can come from neglect. It can come from just feeling unsafe because the parents are arguing and they're feeling overwhelmed, because we feel everything at a higher level. We hear everything at a higher level. But it also means you have this incredibly rich inner dialogue where, I mean, I have full-blown conversations back and forth in my head over things, which sometimes I think that would seem really odd to someone who is neurotypical. And I think this real sad part is that people who have these crazy dialogues in their head, which are fine because they were born that way and it's okay, are being told they're not okay. And they're being told, you have this problem, here's a drug. And it's like, actually, no, what do you lose by losing that creativity?
Yeah.
That, you know, unique. I mean, it really is a crazy dialogue in my head. It's fun. But also now, because I've opened my clairaudience, I hear my guides. I can hear past souls. I've heard my father, as I said.
Okay, so let's go back.
Sure.
What do you mean by your clair?
Sure. Okay, so we are all born with our clair senses open. So you will have heard of somebody who is, oh my God, what's the really common one?
Clairvoyant?
Clairvoyant, thank you. They see images. So loads of people are cool with clairvoyance, but they haven't heard of the others. So you have clairsentient. So clairsentient is where I would be able to sense in your body that something was wrong and I would know the cause of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm claircognizant. I have an incredibly strong knowing. So I just know, and I can't even explain why. I'll know things are going to happen. I'll know this is the right solution. I'll know this is the right direction for me. Sometimes I know that somebody is not, they're not good. I can see through them.
And is that about you knowing or you knowing somebody else?
It's just I just know information.
Okay.
And and often it's I can see straight through somebody, and that's a very lonely place to be sometimes.
Yeah.
Because when others can't, and you kind of have to wait for them to catch up.
Yeah.
Clairaudient is where it's all about hearing. So you'll hear guides, past souls. A lot of people, mediums, are probably clairaudient, though they also get visuals.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more of them that are just lost on me at this precise moment. Claire, the stomach one as well. Or it's taste. Can't remember the word for that. I'm happy to give you these later. But everybody's born with them.
Right.
And they even know now that the vagus nerve runs up. So, you know, when people will go, oh, my gut instinct was, oh, for sure. Because we have a gut brain, a heart brain, before the head brain. So even though your logic brain's locking it down, that's because of our education system and your parents going, no, you can't talk about your invisible friend. People will think you're weird.
Yeah.
Or you can't talk about,
societal norms.
Yeah, fairies and things you're seeing, and so children shut it down.
Right.
There are children that aren't shut down because their parents kind of recognize it and leave them to it. But a lot of children, for those society norms, are shut down. So it's a case of remembering who you are and that you were born with these gifts and reawakening that. Thankfully, my knowing never left, but my clairaudience certainly did. And when I realised it was back, people don't do this. Please don't do this. It was 2015. I had just met Mark Mansour and we were so drunk. I was back in Australia and my sense, I'm much more tapped in when I'm in Australia. I don't know what it is about being in Australia, but I am. And we were really, really drunk, which is really dangerous. So if you ever get messages and you're drunk, do not pass them on. That's my piece of advice. However, in this moment, I was hearing these messages and I didn't know about his sister. I didn't know that she died and I didn't know the cause of it. But I passed on what I was hearing and he just looked at me astonished and just went, that's my sister. And I was able to give him all of these messages that really helped him. And it was this peculiar, like I'm hearing a voice and I'm repeating what I'm hearing. But it's the trouble with being drunk is you can pass something on that somebody's not ready to receive and really upset them. And that's why I'm like, I've actually stopped drinking, so I never do that. Because I didn't stop then. It took a few more years. But because I have passed on messages where I've gone, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Because I wasn't
in the right
they weren't
place.
Ready to hear that. But sometimes they're really funny. I had one, Claire Bush, who I mentioned earlier, I had really hilarious one with her that was so loud. I mean, so it was like somebody was screaming in my ear. We were sitting having, and she wasn't taking care of herself. And the message I was getting, tell her self-care. And it was just
the same thing.
Yeah.
On loud.
On loudspeaker. So where, clairvoyant would get an image, perhaps of Claire not taking care of herself. I just get these really loud voices periodically. Most of the time I have to tune in to get them, which is meditate is what I mean by that, to actually hear them really clearly. But I had no idea that I had these gifts and that just slowly remembered.
Is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't already?
I think I'm going back to the ADHD and the overwhelm and the misdiagnosis, and something that we talked about just off air that I just think is really important. You mentioned feeling really happy in India, even though it's quite crazy. I was in India, Poland, and then America twice last year, and with my beautiful friend Sue Ingram. And when I was in America, I was getting extremely overwhelmed. We were in Texas, and there are just screens everywhere. We were in the hotel lobby, and there were 3 different screens and a telephone ringing, and then the air conditioning was really loud. And as a highly sensitive person, particularly hearing for me, I couldn't cope. And Sue's like, what is it? You're so agitated. I said, it's all the different screens. Why can't they turn it off? Why can't we have silence? What's so wrong with people hearing their thoughts? You have a trend on TikTok of Gen Z's learning that they can walk without earphones in. They can hear their thoughts. And I'm like, it's so sad. But all of that noise, when you're a highly sensitive person, is a lot. And you can get very overwhelmed. And then that's when you'll lash out and then you get misdiagnosed. But interesting, when I came back and you mentioned India, someone said to me, but what about India? It's like overwhelmed.
It's the noise of the centuries.
Different.
Yeah, it is very different noise.
The hotel lobby was divine. I mean, you trickling water and the smell of the flowers, actual flowers. And it was just, it was beautiful, completely different feel in the lobby. But on the road with the cars, it's like, beep, beep, I'm here. Beep, beep, I'm here. It's not, I'm here, like aggro. Like driving this morning, this car behind me got so angry. Nothing to do with me, but was angry at me. And it was angry. The feeling coming through all of those screens is anger. It's news, 3 different news programs, all anger, all misinformation. Whereas in India, it's different. You don't get that. You can see people taking care of each other. Even though the roads are crazy, there's some kind of system. You know that there's a system going on.
They know what the system is.
They know what it is.
What is more important?
There was the most hilarious moment with Sue, and the tuk-tuk went the wrong way up the main road, and she freaked out. And of course, I'd been in Delhi not that long before and just was like, oh, don't worry, we'll be fine. This is just part of it.
Yeah,
and just roll with it. Everyone knows what they're doing. But it's a different energy. So it's very loud, and the smells are incredible from the food and things like that, but it's not aggressive, strangely.
Yeah.
And that was the difference with the energy. But I do wonder why we're being numbed. And I just want people to just even think about that. Is it really, maybe I should learn to emotionally regulate so that I cope with the overwhelm with the noises and stuff. But maybe that would be healthier for me than taking a pill. What am I missing if that's the route I'm planning on going, instead of looking at, well, why am I that way? What's going on? What should I try?
We did kick off the podcast with who is Katrina? I'd like to take 360 back to that question and just allow you to reflect on the conversation we've had and if there's anything you would like to add or change to that.
I would add all of that, but I hope I'm someone who inspires people to seek help. I missed that at the beginning. That's my big thing. I believe, because I went from pure self-hatred to someone who found self-love, who never believed that I would love who I am as a human being, and I do, flaws and all, fully love myself, to someone who now has full self-mastery. So I'm in control of my entire destiny. I feel if I can do that journey, anyone can. So I want to inspire anybody who feels less than in any way, shape or form, just to do something about it. Try something new.
And try anything.
Try
It doesn't
anything.
matter if it's the healing, the conversations, just
Anything.
reach out with some help somewhere.
And it doesn't
along the
matter
line.
what, like, you know, we've been talking and your like logic brain's going, that's just weird. Listeners will be thinking that's okay. Like, it doesn't matter what other people think. Go with what lights you up. Go with what makes you sit up and buzz and you're like, I want to do that.
What makes you curious?
What makes you curious?
Thank you so much for sharing more of who you are with us today.
Appreciate it. Thank you for letting me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning and play. You are a class of your own.